Welcome to a meeting of the Town of Barnstable Comprehensive Financial Advisory Committee. Today is June 26, 2023. The meeting is being recorded and will be available on Channel 18 at the end of the meeting. The agenda is available on the town website. To begin, if we could call the roll, please. Chuck?
Lillian?
Here.
Wendy?
Here.
I saw Jackie. Now I don't. Is Jackie on?
I think she dropped off somehow.
Okay. Neil?
Here in the US.
Hector?
I'm in the town of Osterville.
Chris?
Here.
Chuck is here, so we have a quorum.
Thank you. All right. We'll go right into our discussion. And tonight we have Lane Partridge here. He's the Director of Assessing for the town. And he's going to talk to us about the process and the factors that are taken into account for the assessment. So I know I saw you there, Lane. Where are you?
Hi, everybody. How are you? I'm Lane.
There he
Parker.
is.
Thank you for coming.
Yep. So I don't, are you looking for an overview of how assessments are generated?
The process, I think the process of assessing. How do you
Process
do
of
that?
assessment.
Yeah, the process, yeah.
How many
Yeah,
hours do we have?
and then also maybe a little bit about if the process includes, I know there's neighborhood codes and street codes and different things in the formulation. So that'd be helpful for us to understand exactly.
Well, the simple answer is we have a computer model, a CAMA system. It's our particular system is from a company called Vision Government Solutions, and it's a computer assisted mass appraisal model, and the model has tons of parts to it of what we do to come up with a value. And what we do every year is adjust that model to mimic the market values that are taking place in town. So if a property sells for $500,000 and we have it assessed at $400,000, we're low. So we do that with roughly 1,200 sales that are arm's length sales. Does everybody understand what an arm's length sale is?
Yes.
Okay, so we have close to 2,000 sales a year, but about 1,200 that are arm's length sales that are actually usable in the analysis by DOR regulations. So
How many sales per year, Lane?
Sorry, excuse me.
How many sales per year on average?
Roughly around 2,000 total, but that includes, family sales for $1, which don't tell us anything
Right.
about what the market's doing.
Right, and
So
that's
about
out of
12.
how many residences altogether in the town of Barnstable?
How many, well,
Homes,
well, single family homes, condominiums.
single family, yeah.
Single family. Hang on one sec. $21,104.
21,000, thank you.
Yep.
Okay,
So we take all those sales and adjust our model so that the assessment best matches what those properties sold for. And then once those adjustments have been made, then we use that to assess everybody's value. But we calibrate the model using the sales.
And so how does the neighborhood, what is the purpose of the neighborhood code? I'm just curious because I had some residents of Katuitt ask me this specific question and I wasn't able to answer it.
Well, neighborhood code is just one factor that we adjust. We adjust, style of house, condition, grade, size of house, right down to the shingles on the roof. Do you have wood shingles or asphalt shingles? All of those factors are taken into account. Neighborhood is one of them. And that accounts for if I have a 3-bedroom ranch in Centerville, would that sell for the same amount of money as a 3-bedroom ranch in Osterville? It won't. The Osterville house is going to be more money. It's a more desirable village of the town, and it commands a higher price. So those neighborhood codes adjust for that type of situation where a more expensive location in town pays, to make the assessment match the market value of that property. We use neighborhood codes to adjust to get to those locations.
How do you define neighborhood?
Well, that's a very interesting thing, and it's something that I think needs to be changed. So the way my predecessor did it is neighborhood was really made up of 3 things. So the neighborhood adjustment code is made up of the village, so what village you're in. And then it also includes what neighborhood in that village, because they're not all the same. I mean, each village, you don't pay exactly the same all over Osterville or Hyannis or whatever. There's different areas. And then it also includes a view factor, which would be if you're goes all the way from waterfront property up to how far away you are from walking to the beach, which all go into that neighborhood code. And what we're looking at for the future is to break those out into 3 different factors. So you would have a village factor, a neighborhood factor, and then a water influence factor. And the water influence could be if you're 5 houses away from the beach and you have to walk 5 houses, that's not worth as much money if you're 2 houses away from the beach. So we would be able to more fine tune those adjustments to make it work. And we're looking into that with Vision, our consultant, to change the way that works. Because right now it's very it's convoluted, was what I would say. It works, but if you are a layman and you're not working with it every day like my staff is, it's very hard to figure out.
How do you assess the land? Because a lot of the land went up, but the buildings did not.
Yep. So when I got here a couple of years ago, you had just gone through a revaluation. You also did a conversion to a new computer program, and your assessor retired without, in my opinion, calibrating the model. So there was some things that I found that were inconsistent with how general assessing practices are done. For instance, the land value had not been changed in the model since 2018. So everybody, I think, sitting here would agree that land value went up from 2018 to 2023. Roughly, a 5-year period, the values had to have changed on the land, but they didn't change in the model. So what they were doing was artificially inflating the building values to make up the difference. It wasn't being correctly modeled, in my opinion.
So what kind of factor did you use to bring the land up to present?
We changed the base rate. So the base rate went from, I think it was 118,000 an acre to 159,000 an acre. Don't hold me to those because I'd have to go back and look. I'm on to the next year. So that was quite a while ago, and I don't have those all off the top of my head anymore, but I think that's about right. And that accounted for some of all the big changes you saw in the land values, because they hadn't been touched in years. 5 years.
So Lane, is that an average $159,000 per acre?
No, that's the base rate. So the way it works is you take a base neighborhood, what we use is a neighborhood that has a large population of properties that are very consistent and very similar. So we generally use Centerville. You have all the 3-bedroom ranches over there, and they're all pretty close in value. So we adjust those sales only to figure out where their value should be. We use several techniques. If we can find actual land sales, we use those and compare a lot sale to a lot sale. They're obviously, you know, if you've been over there, there's not a lot of those. But then we also use a technique called residual analysis, which is we subtract the building value from the sales price, and what's left over is what the land value is, or the land sales price. And then we can use that to adjust the model.
Now, how did you come up with the new base rate?
By looking at comparable sales of lots that had occurred in 2021, along with the residual value of improved properties. And then compared those to the assessments that we have, and then adjusted the model so that they matched.
And so do you adjust for the proximity to water, for example?
Yeah, none of that changes. That's all.
Oh,
in-
that doesn't change, I see.
That has, I mean, it can change if waterfront becomes more desirable or less desirable. Those factors can change, but when you change the base land value, then you pretty much, whatever was there is there. You're just changing the model to match, but we don't change. Your house didn't move, so there's no reason to assume that the relationship between a waterfront property and a property 5 houses back from the waterfront change. That relationship ratio is no, I mean, we look at it, but it generally doesn't move.
So there's other factors that would include that data.
Other factors that include that.
Like you were saying, a neighborhood code or a village code.
Yep.
Would adjust for those other factors that.
Right, those have been established over decades of
Yeah.
doing this work, and we don't generally go in and change that unless we see a specific change in what the market is doing. If the market is telling me that, you know, a oceanfront property is increasing at a greater rate than the average or most consistent property is increasing, then we might change that factor and make it a little bigger. But that's fine tuning. That's, you know, that's at the end.
Can I ask a general question? What's the, I can't think of the right way to say this. How much autonomy do you have to do all this? Is there a check and balance process once you do this, or does the appeal process serve as the way to resolve disagreement?
Both. So
okay.
the staff and the consultant does the best they can to adjust the model to match the sales prices, the best job we think we can do. It then gets checked by the Department of Revenue every single year. We have to get our values approved by them every single year before we can set tax rates or do anything else. So they go through an analysis to look at our numbers to see if they're matching their requirements. Now, they use a statistical analysis to do that. They basically use a median value of assessment to sales ratios and a coefficient of dispersion of that group or sample size. So it has to be, so, excuse me. Sorry, first day back, I've been out, not feeling very well.
I'm sorry.
So they take the all the sales by class. So all the single family residents get classed together, the condominiums get classed together, 2 families, 3 families, apartments, all are separated out by class that have sold. And then they run statistical analysis on that, looking at the median value of the ASR. Now, the ASR is just the assessment divided by the sales price. And it gives you a ratio. And that ratio has to be within 10% of 100% of market value. So if a house sells for $100,000, I have to assess it somewhere between 95 and 110. Is that right? No, 90 and 110.
Right.
We generally shoot for 95, but then every category of the of property in town has to be within 5 points of the 95 of the largest category. So our largest category is single family homes. So if I bring that in as a median ASR ratio of 95, then everybody else has to be between 90 and 100 in their medians, not necessarily an individual property, but the median of that sample size. And then we do a coefficient of dispersion on that, and on each one of those samples, the coefficient of dispersion has to be under 10.
Wow.
And that's what they do to qualify it. So it's quite a bit of work to adjust the model, but then also meet the requirements of the Department of Revenue. And those are the 2 things we focus on. And I would be naive if I thought that there weren't some that were wrong. We have 28,000 parcels, all being valued by one computer model. You know, I'd be the first one to tell you I don't get it right. I don't get it all right. It's impossible. There's going to be some that are off. And that's where your abatement process comes in. And this year we had some difficulty with Hyannisport. A lot of people came in. We took a second look at it. We determined that some things weren't adjusted quite right there, and a lot of people got abatements. A lot of people did. I mean, we're probably, I don't remember the exact numbers at this point, but it's well over 50% got an abatement this year out of 480 roughly applications, which also only represents 1.18% of the entire population.
Right. Yeah.
So I've got a 98 point whatever 2% approval rating. If you want to flip it.
You did well.
We did pretty good. I mean,
Yeah, you did.
when you raise values 20 on average 27%, and you had less than 2% of the population file an abatement, I think that was pretty successful. So.
Oh, so was 27% across the board?
That was the average.
Okay.
So there were some there's some that went way up, and because you hadn't changed land values in 5 years, there were some that doubled. You know, some land values that doubled. The waterfront in particular was drastically undervalued. Arguably the taxpayer that's most able to afford it, you know, most expensive houses were grossly underassessed.
Yeah.
And why is that? Because somebody didn't look at land values for the last 5 years, and why was that the case?
I don't know why they didn't. I was not here, but I only discovered what the issues were and fixed them.
Right.
I can't tell you why they weren't or why they didn't.
Okay.
You know, you had an awful lot of transition going on there. You had a recertification year, you had a conversion to a new software system, and you had
We had the inspections too.
an assessor that had only been here, I think, 3 years at that point, Mark, maybe 2,
Right.
and retired very shortly after there. So I don't think you had, trying to be nice, I don't think you had the people paying as much attention as they should have been.
Right. So you answered a question I was going to ask. You know, is the average increase in assessment, was 27% across town.
Right.
But what was the maximum increase? Some of them were
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, some
Or
of them were
more?
100%. Yeah. I think we had some that were 100.
Wow.
Do you think that some of those would be parcels that maybe were tear downs and a rebuild? Or,
We account for that.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, if you tear every permit that is pulled at the building department, we get a copy of it and we go out and look at. So if you had torn down a property and built a new one, yes, that assessment's probably gonna, maybe triple. That's gonna make a huge difference. So, but we do look at those and account for those, and that's where you get your new growth. So if we go out and you've torn down a house and you build a McMansion, and the value goes from $1 million to $4 million, 3 million of that is the growth number, which is the excess over the 2.5 that you guys get to spend.
Yeah. And
Um,
so the 20% was 27% was the average. So did your tax revenue increase by 27%?
no,
No,
tax rate went down.
tax rate went down. So if you
Okay.
were at the average 27%, your tax bill went up about I think it was $280. So because we went up 27%, but the tax rate came down considerably also. So if anybody under 27% or below got a very minor or actually got a tax break because the tax rate dropped so much. So you had half of the town that probably paid less, and you get half of the town that probably paid more.
Yeah, I think we had over 7,300 residential taxpayers actually see a decrease in their tax bill.
Wow. When you talk about water, what was the term you used? Water view factor?
Water factor, yeah.
Water factor. Is that whether it's a lake or the sound or the bay, are those all equal pretty much?
They're not all equal, but they all get adjusted. So a lake front property is not the same as a ocean front property, but they
Right.
both have factors. The
Right.
lake front have a smaller factor than the ocean front one, but they both-
Right. So I have a friend who lives on Lake Waquaket, and his value, his assessed value went up 55%. It can one assume that, and I know he hasn't done any work on his house for a few years. Can one assume that many waterfront properties went up by over 50%?
Yeah, I would. I'd like to go look to tell you for sure,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't be
Yeah.
surprised if they did. Think
Yeah,
about it. If you have $100,000 value on a lot of land, and it has a 50% factor for water influence, so
right,
that makes it 150. But now
Right.
you take the $100,000 and make it 169 or 159. I forget which it was. But
mhm,
you still have the factor of 50% on there.
yeah,
That's going to be a significantly larger jump than somebody who doesn't have a water factor.
okay. One sort of an unrelated question. On the assessor website, under the tab for assessed values for homes, you have appraised value and assessed value, and they seem to be identical most
They
of the
are.
time.
Yeah, most of the time they're
What's the
identical.
difference? What's the
The
difference?
difference that is used mostly for chapter value properties, or a property that has some sort of a discount, a tie. You could have a tie or a TIF. It's going to show what the value would be without that discount, and then
Oh, right.
that would be the appraised, and then the assessed would show what the value was with the discount.
Mhm.
And the discount stems from what?
Well, for chapter land, it's a state program, chapter 61, 61A, and 61B. And
Oh,
if you have land that is in forestry, farming, or open space, you can enter this program and get a discount on the value of your property. If you have a TIF or a tie, it's something that's approved by the town council to allow you to, generally on development for housing is what they're doing it mostly on right now. So if you have a housing development that you want to do, and you're going to have an affordable housing component to it, you can solicit through the planning department to the council to get a reduction in your taxes because you're building affordable housing. I haven't seen a TIF come through Barnstable, but we have done, I think we did 2 ties last year.
You're using the words TIF and tie? What?
Yeah,
Can you
tax
spell
and-
those?
Tax with it's just TIF, tax incentive formula, and tax incentive. Yeah, I can't remember what they are. Mark, do you get them?
Yeah, the TIF factor is tax increment financing. That is a property tax reduction for certain commercial properties that in exchange for a tax reduction promise job growth, for example. It's usually tied to job-related creation.
Okay,
As Lane said, we haven't had many of those. And then tax increment exemption is for the development of residential rental property.
Hmm.
And it could be workforce housing. It doesn't have to be affordable. And people can come in and apply for a property tax reduction in exchange for creating housing for the town.
okay.
And
Okay.
The council has approved a few of those.
Lane,
TIF
Lane,
and
I'd
tie,
like,
okay.
TIF and tie.
Lane, I'd like to go back to the assessing.
Yeah, sure.
You have a base rate for land. Is there a base rate for houses?
Yep. Each style of house has its own factor. So Cape, Ranch, Colonial, Garrison, Gambrel, we have a whole list of them, and we do have a base value for that, which is what everything builds off of. So if you had I forget what ranch was this year. I think it was $200 a foot, 210 maybe. And that would be the base value or the base cost to build that house. Then if you add, like, let's say, wood shingles on the roof and wood shingles on the siding instead of vinyl siding, then that gets an increment factor up. The condition of that house, if that house is in really good condition, you've kept it up, it's been maintained, you've pulled building permits to update kitchens and bathrooms, then you might have a condition factor of good versus average. And then the quality of construction, or what's on our records as grade. If you built the beautiful house with all the, bells and whistles, it's definitely worth more than, a Home Depot builder's package ranch.
Yeah.
So those get adjusted for that as well. And that's why I said, all these factors are all in there. They're all in every single property. If you go on to our website and you pull your property up and there's a button that says property record card,
Right.
print that and you can look at it and see all the factors that get adjusted every year for this. And so when we do the recertification every 5 years with the state, they go through everything. I have to run a report on almost every single factor to show them why it is what it is. In the interim years, we basically work off of the base rate. So we'll adjust the base rate for the properties and assume that the other relationships between grade and condition and shingles and number of bathrooms and all that remain the same.
So you're saying that you maintain the same condition for 5 years?
Unless we've been out. So we do have
Unless you've been
to,
out.
we are required by the DOR to inspect every property at least once every 10 years.
Right.
So if we have been out, if we haven't been there for 10 years, yeah, you're probably the same. And we find that often, and it always is mind-boggling to me that people don't want us to inspect that property if we haven't been there for 10 years. Because if you haven't pulled permits and you haven't done major construction or upgrading of your house, it's probably gonna be lower. So if I had you as a good condition 10 years ago and you haven't done anything, you're probably average. So the value will go down. So we will go out and look at those things. Also, if you pull a building permit, that triggers an inspection, which we come up with, and that inspector will look at all of those factors while they're there. They'll check the size of the house. They'll check the siding, the shingles, the windows. Have you done windows? Whatever. And that all goes into the condition and the grade of the house.
Well, do you contract with special inspectors to fulfill the 10-year requirement?
Yeah, Mark and I have been talking about this one. So
It's a niggly one, you know?
we are doing the best we can. Mark was very gracious to us this year, and we did some finagling with my budget, and we were able to add another inspector, which has been very helpful for this for 23. Kind of tough keeping a person in the chair, but it definitely has helped. So we are trying to keep up with that as best we can. But when we get to the recertification year, ours is 26. Excuse me. The Department of Revenue requires
Right.
a certain number of inspections to have been done, and if we haven't done it, then they can refuse to certify us and hold us up on getting the tax rate set and all kinds of things. It can have a great impact. I think we're doing pretty good. In fact, I just got an email from our rep at the Department of Revenue, who we're on our 3rd year now, 3 years from our last certification, and they're checking in. So I have to produce a whole bunch of reports to send to them to see so they can see where we are. And if they don't think we're in the right place, they're going to point that out and tell us you need to pick this up.
So is there a flexibility for that 10-year mandatory inspection? I mean, clearly, if you have to
If they're in a good
28
mood, maybe, but I have a very good relationship with the bureau chief and several other high-ranking people in the DOR. I've known them for 24 years. Could I talk them into giving us a break and maybe make something up? Yeah. In fact, I think, Mark, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think on the last recertification, you didn't have enough inspections done, and they allowed you to catch up in the next year, but you had to do a certain amount of inspections in that next year, and then they let you go through. Could we get that again? Probably. But it's they want to see those. So
Was it a COVID related problem, a staffing problem, or just volume?
Volume is definitely hard. I mean, it's 2,800 properties we have to look at every single year. So that's a lot of driving around the town. So
we were contracting out some of that service, and we can't control it as well when we contract it out. When we bring it in-house, like we did in fiscal year 23 by adding that position in Elaine's department, we have a lot more accountability on how many properties we can get to on an annual basis. And so we got rid of that outside contracted service.
Yeah, that's a question I was asking, because it's really difficult. You have to physically inspect the house.
yeah, it's
Over
Although
2,000 a year.
some counties use the drive-by survey. The windshield inspection.
No, they're not allowed to do that. They may do it, but that's going to catch up and bite them. That's not
No,
allowed.
they're not supposed to do it, right?
Yeah. So that's, you got to at least get out of the car and walk around the house. So we generally update our pictures at the same time, so we have the most current picture of the house. You have to do. We don't have to get in. We always request to get in, but there's nothing in the law that requires a taxpayer to let us into their house. Yeah, actually put on the property.
Yeah.
Lane's also looking into another tool that we might be able to use to help us with this cyclical inspection program. It's called Nearmap. And it's like a GIS tool, but you can drill down a lot closer to the property and see all the out structures, outbuildings on the property, for example. You get 3D views. It's updated on a regular basis. I'm not sure what the intervals are, but it's a couple of times a year at least.
Yeah, twice a year. Yeah.
Twice a year. And so we're checking to see if the Department of Revenue will allow us to do desktop cyclical reviews by going and using this tool of Nearmap, as opposed to having to drive out there and physically
Yeah.
walk the property.
How do you spell near map?
Nearmap.
Near map, okay.
Near map.
Nearmap.
Yeah.
Near map.
Yeah.
This is like Google Maps for properties, I guess.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
exactly.
very detailed, and they do what they call oblique photographs. So not only do they do an aerial photograph straight down, but they also do angles in at the house. So you can actually, there's like a little compass on the screen, and you can actually click around the compass and see all four sides of the house. So that's very good. We're working with the DOR right now to get them to commit, which they're being reluctant to committing to, a percentage of cyclical inspections that we can do by desktop review. They're not going to let us do them all. I can tell you that right now. They're very adamant to have boots on the ground, but I'm hoping 30% of them can be done this way, and it can be very quick. So that's going to really help us to catch up.
And cyclical inspections, that refers to 1/10 of the properties every year.
Correct.
Right. I have a different question, Lane. So a lot of houses are in Barnstable are on private roads,
Mhm.
and some private roads are in better shape than others. And I live on Deerfield Road in Osterville, and there are 3 other roads that are part of the neighborhood. It aggregates 61 properties. We've been talking back and forth with the town about getting the town to redo all the roads.
Mhm.
And a number of people, neighbors have said, well, geez, you know, we redo the roads and our property values are going to go up by X%. So my question is, and I assume the answer is no, but you don't take the condition of the road into account when you assess a house, do you?
No, we don't have any factor for that. And if you have somebody that can tell you how much paving a road is going to increase the value of the house, I want to talk to them. They're geniuses.
Well, it's just, you know, from a market, from a perception value, if our roads have a lot of potholes and they're paved over, and they haven't been paved over, I think in our neighborhood for 20 or 25 years.
But that keeps the traffic going slow down the road. Didn't you know that?
Sorry?
Yeah,
That's
that's
an
I'm
advantage.
well aware of that.
Yeah. So, you know,
Little-
it's all in perception. You're right.
Right.
But
Right.
we don't adjust for that. You know, if a house sells less because it's on a dirt road or a bad road, it'll
Right.
show up in our factors probably as a low
Okay.
ratio.
Okay.
We might look at that, and we, you know, if it's really bad, we might put something on that road. But it has to really stand out to do that, because, you know, you're now talking about properties in the, you know, the crummiest part of town are selling for $500,000 for a
Right.
you know, 2-family. It's, you know, in the, I don't want to say bad section, but the
Right.
less affluent section of Hyannis.
Right.
You know, I'm going in there, and those 2 families are going for, you know, high 4s.
Right.
So, you know, when you then say those roads have potholes and everything else in them, well, what percentage reduction should that be?
Right.
So let's say there's 10 houses on a road and it costs you $100,000 to pave it. So 10,000 a house. Over what period of time,
Right.
you know, discounting, what do you want me to make that factor? $1,000?
Yeah. 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 No, I'm
You know
not
what I mean?
arguing
So-
that you ought to take into account the road. I was just asking what the practice is. And I think you answered my question. I think you,
Yeah.
what you said was that if a road is pretty bad, that will affect sale prices in the neighborhood.
Yeah,
And that's how
we would identify it.
the condition of the road would be factored into the assessed value of houses.
Right, it would come up in the sales price, and it's
Right.
just like, even if it's a nice road, but it's a private road and you have to pay to plow it. It would come up in the sales price. We would see it there if it was a
Right.
major deduction.
Right.
But, it has to be a really good, reduction to make it work, and it has to be consistent. So we would then go back and look, maybe the last 5 years on that street, check out those sales. Well, did they all sell low too? Okay, so maybe there's something here that
Okay.
we can play with.
Okay. Okay.
Unfortunately, right now, I don't have a mechanism to really do that except manually. And you can't start adjusting properties manually. We just don't have the staff.
No, you wouldn't want to do
Anything
that.
else, so.
Well,
Unfortunately, there is a range.
I've got a tax question. Do we know how many properties qualify for and use the elderly exemption 41C?
I can get you that number. I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's not significant.
I mean, it's almost oxymoronic for this town, but I thought I'd ask.
Yeah, we do have some. There's no doubt about it. We do have more veterans exemptions than 41 Cs,
yeah.
but 17 Ds and 41 Cs, they're both an elderly.
No, I just wanted to know what percentage perhaps decreased our total tax base.
At what year do you get to qualify for the?
65.
Well,
What-
that's part
You
of,
don't qualify.
What year? What'd you say?
At 65.
Oh, but my husband does.
but there's
But you have
also,
to have an income. There's an
yeah,
income.
it's income
There's an
requirements
income
as well.
threshold
in
also.
Washington State.
You don't qualify.
And, the Assessors Association have been talking with the legislature for years about that, because those numbers haven't changed for decades.
That's
Probably
ridiculous,
30,
actually.
40 years.
Yeah, for
They're still the same amount. I
$25,000.
mean, even if you got it now, the maximum you get is $1,000. It's just, they aren't kept up with it. And the reason they don't want to change it is because if they make the change at this point, it's an unfunded mandate. And they're gonna have to fund it. So they
That's
won't
true.
change them. They will change. We are working with them to give us local option to change some things. So that if the town chooses to change those requirements and make it more attainable for our residents, they'll let us do that because they're not on the hook for it. So, but that's, that's slow in coming, getting the legislature to do something is not the easiest thing in the world, so.
But
The state
maximum,
is
that
talking.
maximum income is absolutely not realistic anymore.
Correct, I totally agree with you.
Yeah, there's no way.
I've read that the state has put on the table a doubling of the maximum senior circuit breaker tax credit for state income tax purposes, I think from 1,200 to 2,000 or
I did hear that, yes.
yeah, something like that. But that's different.
Yeah, that doesn't affect us. I don't know, Mark, should I talk about the senior means exemption or?
Yes, please do.
Yes.
So,
Wendy's interested in this.
okay, so the association, the Assessors Association, has a legislative committee, just like the MMA, and we have a legislative agent that works for us. And we are trying to get a standardized senior mean tested exemption, which takes into account your income and the percentage of your real estate taxes in comparison to your income. So that if you're paying over 10% of your income to real estate taxes, you can get this exemption. We are putting it in as a local option. There are towns that have put in home rule petitions. My town, former town that I worked for, Concord, was the second town to do this. In Concord, it helped about 35, 40 people with tax relief. It could be more down here. It all depends on how we structure it. I would encourage you to wait till this legislative session is over. I've already had a hearing on it. I do believe it's out of committee and is, headed to the House, I think. It got passed in the House last year, and I don't think it got passed in the Senate. So I think there's going to be some movement on that in this session. And that would be something that we could adopt by local option to give tax relief. It is a shift of the tax rate, just like our residential exemption. So it wouldn't be affecting your job with the finances. You wouldn't have to figure out how you're going to pay for it. It would get adjusted in the tax rate. So it's something that if we really, the town is really looking to do something like that, that would be my recommendation how to do it.
And have you had support from the legislative delegation for Barnstable, Senator Sear or Representative Diggs or Exaros?
I have not been on the front line of that, so I can find out, but our delegation, our legislative agent, and also the legislative agent for Council on Aging has been working hard on it, and they joined up this session. They weren't promoting it together last session, so I think it has a good shot of getting through. So they do have a good list of sponsors, but I'm not sure if any of the Cape delegation is on it.
Do you know what the bill number is?
Not off the top of my head. I can get it for
Okay.
you.
All right, thank you.
I think we've worn you out. Does anybody have any other questions or comments of Lane?
Well, I think it's very interesting. I would
Thank you
just,
so much.
I just would add that on the assessor's website, there are a variety of documents, a primer on Proposition 2.5, FAQ about property values, fiscal 2023, and so forth. So there's a lot of information on the website that if people want to learn more about this topic, you can go there.
Yeah, and we did a video last year that was on the website, front page of the website for a month, and did some other things. Hope to do some more this year.
Yeah.
I would encourage you though, if you have a constituent that has questions about this, have them call me.
Yeah.
I'd be
Yeah.
glad to talk to them about it. It's a very complicated problem, that it's very hard to understand how it comes from and where it comes from, but we try to be as as open about it as we can. But it's there's a lot of assessors in this state that don't get this, never mind taxpayers. So when you get into a big community like this, it gets even more complicated. But I am glad to talk to anybody about the situation. They're welcome to file an abatement in January. If they don't like the values, that's fine. We will always take a second look. And like I said, I don't have the exact numbers, but I know over 50% of the abatements were granted this year.
Wow.
So-
What's your
so you-
phone number, Lane? No, I'm not interested in pursuing abatement. I just want to make a note of your number.
On the website.
Right on the website. Yeah, just have them call. I don't screen my calls. My staff will let you write in. So just call the
Okay.
assessor's office.
Well, Lane, I have to tell you, the overview that you did for Channel 18 on the assessing and the taxes was just excellent.
Oh,
And
thank you.
I hope that they will repeat it next year, or maybe you can do another one.
Yeah, we'll probably,
But
because it'll change.
it was really, really good.
Yeah, things are going to change for next year. The numbers won't be the same, so we'd have to redo it. But the one thing I will tell you is that I have not seen any change. So, last year we used 21 values because it was, our valuation date is the January before the start of the fiscal year. So we're coming up to 24 right now. So the valuation date is January 1st of 23. 23 using the sales data from 22.
Right.
So we're going to be looking at the 22 sales, and my staff and I have been driving around town looking. We go and look at every single sale, just to make sure, that we have the best record of what that sale is in our database, because that's the basis for all the changes, is what those sales sold for and how we have them in our system in relation to what they sold for. So we're out driving around and looking, and I'm telling you, the 22 didn't go down.
Wow.
It's going up. I don't think it's gonna be 27%, but I will bet it's gonna be 15.
Wow.
We're going
Yeah.
up. 23, I have not seen drop yet either. Even with the higher interest rates, I haven't seen a lot of stuff move. So,
Wow.
this isn't, a lot of people will say, well, that was 21, that was COVID, that was a blip. Yeah, if it went back down the next year, you can say that, but not when it went up. And then the next year is still going up.
And there's
Wow.
just not enough inventory, I think.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally. The inventory.
Absolutely. Well,
Yeah.
more important than your telephone number is what kind of cars do you drive, so we can keep an eye out for you
Oh, there you go.
wandering around town.
It's an
My,
armored car with
Yeah, we're
turrets.
looking for the car.
So just look for the bullseye. We have the town seal and the assessors division
Okay.
on a magnetic decal that's on the side of our cars if we go in our personal cars. And then we do have a town car that has the seal on the
All
door.
right. So we'll
So-
look for it.
Gives you something to aim at as we drive by.
Actually, a question about on the assessor's webpage. One of the links that's very useful is a Warren fiscal year 2023 property files, which is the downloadable Excel spreadsheet, which is has a tremendous amount of very, very interesting data. And since I love looking at data, one of the things I noticed about that is the valuations are all for 2022, not for 2023. Will there be, or when will there be a file with the 2023 valuations? Do you know?
For the Warren Group, I don't. I don't know who's putting that on the website. I'll have to check that out. We don't use that. So
It's on the website, but you don't use it?
we don't, because we get our data directly from the Registry of Deeds. The Warren Group is a secondary company that solicits information from every town in the state and then
Right.
links it up with their data that they have collected. So I can't use somebody else's data to do valuations. So I think they're always going to be a year behind, because they ask us for our file in December. So last December, they got the 23 file of what we did for values, and then they posted it. So sometime in January, February, I think. So at this point, it's only going to have that one-time 23 value on it. 24 values we're working on, they will be available. Sometime we'll post them in late December.
Yeah, I found that very useful because instead of having to look at every property individual, it has all 28,000 or 26,677 residential properties in one file. And one of the things that comes out when you look at that, if I'm doing my math right, is 50% of the property taxes are actually paid for by the people who own second homes. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it's probably about right. Well, I don't know if I could say that. I can tell you that the people who get the residential exemption is roughly 50%. So
That would make sense.
would
Yeah,
make
that's
sense.
right. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
no, it turns out 28% of the properties in the residential file, which is most of the property tax, pay about 50% of the property taxes when you take into account a couple things. One is based upon that file, which I think is really something that I would encourage being updated as you go along, and even if you don't use it. I think there's some real interesting insights in there in terms of the value, the assessed value on average for second homes is about 40% higher than for residences that the owners live in.
That also makes,
I've never done that analysis, so I can't comment. I
Yeah,
don't know.
and so I think the reason it's interesting is I think it has some significant implications to policy. When you have that much of the property tax coming from non-residents. I mean, I knew that was true in Chatham, but I never thought about it being true in Barnstable. And so I think as people consider what the trade-offs are in the future, trying to get deeper into that might be useful.
So how did they develop the 27%? How do they know who lives there and who doesn't?
I did that. Well, actually, it's interesting. There's a published number by a couple different sources which talks about 28%. And if you take the Warren spreadsheet that's on the website, and you take all the people who have a billing address that is not their residence, you come out with 28%.
Yeah, I think, Neil, a more accurate distribution analysis of this would be, we can take our tax bill file and we can identify which properties have a residential exemption and which one don't, and we can come up with that calculation that's very accurate.
I think that would be, I'm just saying that I was surprised at the ratios, which actually seem to tie some other numbers. And I'm thinking it's just a matter of when you get underneath the, the macro, because I think what Lane's explained in terms of how they do the assessments makes tremendous sense. I mean, it sounds like they do an amazing job at getting to the details of this, as much as I personally hated when they looked at the waterfront stuff for the first time in 5 years, being on the waterfront in a lake. But I think it makes total sense how they're going about it. I'm just thinking that in the macro, what you're talking about, Mark, in terms of understanding where the revenues are coming from, might be useful as the town council decides on the residential exemptions in the future and things of that nature. I was surprised at how much comes from non-residents.
Sure.
Yeah, I think it's more, I would argue it's probably more than 27%.
I think so too. I think it's probably over 50.
Yeah, I would guess it's over 50.
yeah.
Yeah.
But that's why I asked you where those numbers come from, because that doesn't jive with what, what I know, than what Mark and I deal with the residential exemption, and how many people qualify for it and how many people are getting it. And that relates also to second home values and second home personal property accounts and how many of those we have. I think your 27% is pretty low.
Yeah.
It comes from the file on your website.
Which we don't use. I don't know why it's on there, other than for people who like information, but it's not information we use in assessing.
I understand that. So I would look forward to having another session where somebody could go through that information with the town's data.
Well, I agree, Neil, that some of this information would be probably important for the town council to at least have the numbers in front of them when they're deciding on policy.
Agree. Thank you, Neil.
Yeah, and we do have an Excel spreadsheet on the website that we produce that's there, and you're welcome to go through that and use that data instead of, I would prefer you did that than an outside company's analysis of what we have.
I maybe I misspoke. The spreadsheet I use is on the Barnstable website.
Yeah,
I don't find any other spreadsheet. Do you know what it's called?
I'll have to go look. Staff puts that up on the site and stuff. I'll make sure you're using the right one. But again, I don't think those numbers. I mean, we have 13, I forget what it was this year, 13,500 that get the residential exemption out of 22,000.
Right.
So, I don't know.
Well, I think from looking at the data file, what is called the Warren data, I think a lot of that and I don't know, but a whole bunch of properties, a huge number, thousands and thousands of properties are listed as $100 in assessed value. Could be a data error on Warren's
No,
part.
no, we have very small land areas, little pieces of property,
Yep.
all over the place. Yes.
So I guess what.
So they wouldn't get, they'd have zero tax and no exemption.
Yeah, some of them would, some of them don't. I mean, it depends on what their actual value is, but yes, there is a limit to what we send out on bills. So, but there are a lot of there's, partial interests of properties. There's small little land area properties that have very small values. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it would just be, having a good file with the latest of assessed values per property would be very useful. And then looking at the data and then what it means to the town would be, is all I'm suggesting.
You're the guys. You're the one setting policy. So I'm sure that would be
Well,
fun.
that was one of my concerns, Lane's. We don't set any policy.
No?
We are just an advisory committee. We try and help the town council and give them information and analyze things as requested. We don't actually have any power to do anything on our committee other than that.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
it's different than Concord.
Yeah, every town's different. Yep.
Yeah, so just, that was one of the points I wanted to make to you, because one of the other residents knew I was on the finance committee, and I think she actually did talk to you, and she nearly attacked me for because you told her that the finance committee was the one doing this.
I could have. I'm sorry if I did.
I was like, please
apologize, but,
please don't target us.
Okay. No, not my intention, certainly. So you certainly have, I would say, have more, maybe not setting policy, but you probably have the ear of the council a lot more than I do. I'll say that.
Well, this is the deepest I think we've had in the 3 years I've been on this committee with regard to tax assessment. So it's really helpful, because after I was getting these questions, I started asking questions. I'm like, well, how does this happen? And Mark was kind enough to ask you to make a presentation to us. This is helpful.
My pleasure. I'll come back and answer any questions you want on valuation. I do, just to give you a heads up, I think we're going up again this year. So again, tax rate going down. And, I think probably a more a bigger concern than who's paying what in the residential side would probably be in the shift of the valuations from commercial to residential. I think that's an impact you gotta look at.
So
And
Out
you,
of town
and,
versus in town, I'm not that worried about, but when you have 27% increase in residential and only 15 in commercial industrial, you're literally shifting the tax base to the residential side.
Right.
You aren't, I'm not, the market is, it's
Yeah.
just what's happened.
Yeah.
But I think that's a consideration or something that I think is more concerning than residents versus second home people. I think that natural shift that's going on, and it's happening all over the country, not just here. Certainly Boston is sweating it out dramatically at the moment. They're having all kinds of trouble. But I think that's something, maybe it's time for a split rate, who knows? But I think that's something to dig into, that as more of a concern from a policy point of view than second homes versus residents.
Lane, thank you so much for your patience and
You're
for
welcome.
providing us with all of this information. As you can tell from our questions, we have a high level of interest in this.
Well,
And
we're
we will
taxpayers.
ask
I
you
get it.
back. And I hope
Yeah.
you feel better soon.
Thank you. I'm definitely on the mend.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lane.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Chris, just for your information, you had asked about the bill numbers.
Yeah.
Currently 3 bills in the 193rd current session.
Yep.
For 2872, 2798, and 2809. All
Okay.
three were scheduled for a hearing on May 9th, 2023. Nothing's posted to the website beyond that. So maybe they were talking about how to converge those 3 bills because they all probably read pretty similar to one another, but they
Yeah,
were.
they're probably all the same bill filed by different legislators. Yep. Thank you.
Are they all in the same committee?
Referred to, well, they're all in a joint committee right now.
Joint committee?
They're gonna have a joint
Okay.
hearing on May 16th, May 9th, 2023. But there's no results of what came out of that joint hearing.
Well, if it comes out of the joint committee, then the probability of us being passed is very high. So that's a good sign.
It's just a hearing.
Well, at least in that it's just a hearing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we'll see. I'll take a look at it. Thanks, Mark.
All right. Our next item is the projected funding of CWMP. Mark?
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Everybody see this okay?
Yep. Whoa, yes.
All right, so this is just the master cash flow spreadsheet that we maintain that details all the various funding sources and commitments that we have for this program. And there's a lot of different assumptions built into this. So we're projecting a beginning balance of about $24 million for the program for fiscal year 24. And that's a commingled of multiple funding resources that we've created over the years, including, you know, the special revenue fund that we have where meals tax and rooms tax go into, the stabilization fund we created for short-term rental tax and so forth. And our resources for the program on an annual basis include rooms tax on traditional lodging. And these are our projections here going out over the next 10 years as to what those be, what those are gonna, we project those to be, modest increases.
Right.
Same thing with meals tax, modest increase. What's interesting here in the short-term rental taxes is we've built in a 20% reduction for fiscal year 24. And I'm not sure if you saw the recent Boston Globe article that said short-term rentals on Cape Cod are down 20% bookings.
Yeah.
Yep, that's true.
So we took that article and we'll see what the quarterly payments reveal, but we used that as a basis to reduce the amount of money we project from short-term rental tax and then modestly increase that in the out years. Again, these are very volatile taxes. These first three revenue sources here, they're all subject to economic ebbs and flows. Well, depending upon how the economy goes, typically, you know, disposable income is one of the first things people cut back on. Discretionary spending. I mean, they'll stop. They won't go out to eat as often. Local residents as well as visitors that come here. We won't perhaps have as much visitors coming here, thereby reducing rooms tax revenue and short-term rentals, et cetera. But then we'll have periods of time where things are very strong, like they have been for the past couple of years, which has helped us contribute to this increase, this growth here that we have in the fund balance at the beginning of the fiscal year.
I have to say though, Mark, on the short-term rentals, even though the volume may go down, the price they're being rented for may be going up.
Yeah, and we may see, Wendy, what might happen is that people may be inclined to cut their rental price in order to get some bookings.
Yeah.
Because of the competition that's out there. There seems to be, you know, a lot of competition for these with a fewer amount of people vying for what's available. And so people there could be a price war going on in the future that may result in, people having to cut their prices. So even if
Right.
the bookings are down, the prices could go down as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, well, or they could go up.
Anybody guess?
Don't
right?
don't be negative about this,
Yeah. So, and then we have a general fund contribution. We've been committing $750,000 of new property tax growth a year to this program over a 5-year period. Fiscal year 24 is our second year, so we're up to 1.5 million. And eventually that grows to 3.75 million after a 5-year investment by 2027. Then in fiscal year 24, we made our first contribution of an additional $2 million with the budget that was just passed to dedicate 2 million more in property taxes towards this program. So for fiscal year 24, we have a total of $3.5 million of property taxes dedicated towards this program. And then we have earnings on investments. We've increased our assessment or our estimate for investment earnings based on what we're actually realizing in the market these days on our excess cash deposits. So we've upped that. We have some existing sewer assessments here. These are assessments we're collecting from the Stewart's Creek area, which was a sewer expansion we did almost 10 years ago now. And then we have new assessments starting to come on the books, but they won't come on the books until fiscal year 2025. And the first project that we'll actually start seeing assessment revenue come in on will be the Strawberry Hill Road project. That line will not be turned on for property owners to tie into until a year from now, about a year from now, because we have to install risers in some locations along that road because how deep the pipe is buried, sewer pipe. And we also, Eversource does not have the equipment installed yet at the pump station at the corner of Strawberry Hill Road and Craigville Beach Road yet because of a lack of supply. So they don't have the equipment installed there yet, so that pump station isn't functioning yet. And so those two things need to happen in order for us to turn the spigot on, so to speak, to allow the property butters to tie into that sewer line, and that won't be until a year from now. And then we'll issue those assessments. People can either elect to pay those in full or apportion them over a future number of tax bills for up to 30 years. Some may elect 5, some may elect 10, some may elect the maximum of 30. So we'll start seeing sewer assessment revenue begin in 2025, and then it'll grow a little bit every year as we issue more assessments, as more projects get completed, and these are our estimates for those going forward.
And with regard to the investment income, is that strictly based on increased rates, or have you changed any of your investment objectives?
It's based on an average interest rate.
Okay.
Our objectives are still the same. Safety is number 1, liquidity is number 2, and yield is our third priority.
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay.
So we're getting safe investments right now. Some of them are returning in excess of 4%.
That's great.
It's fantastic.
And then we have, eventually as these properties start tying into the system, we'll start collecting user charge revenue, and we can direct some of that revenue towards this program. Right now, we're using a 50-50 assumption, meaning half the revenue from new user charges will be directed towards funding the expansion, and half will be directed towards covering operational cost of our sewer enterprise fund, because as we tie more people into the system, the operating costs theoretically for the sewer treatment will increase because we have more sewage to collect and treat, and that results in the use of more chemicals, the collection of more sludge, and the dewatering and transportation of that sludge and getting it out of here, and so forth. So we're just using assumption right now 50-50 and any user charge revenue and how we'll direct that either to operations or expansion.
Mhm.
And then down here we have our approved budget for fiscal year 24 of $1,974,000 for project management, $2,650 for cash funded capital expenses. And then $1,123,000 for debt service. And for a total commitments of 5.7 million, which results in about a growth of 3 million, where excess resources over commitments of about 3 million, an ending fund balance of $27 million. And so we project that out over a 10-year period, and it looks right now that we are okay. I have a check down here at the very bottom that looks at what our subsequent year commitments are, because we need to have in reserves the full amount of our subsequent year's commitments in reserves, because that's what we have to appropriate the following year's budget from.
Right.
Well, for example, our commitments here in fiscal year 25 are $7.6 million. So we need to make sure that we have $7.6 million in reserves to appropriate to pay that cost. We expect to have 27 million. So we're okay. And that's the case for every year out here over the next 10 years, assuming that this is the end of the program. This is just for the projects for the next 5 years. Doesn't include anything beyond fiscal year 28. Okay. This, if we were to stop this program and just do the next 5 years, we're okay. But that's not the situation. We're going to be adding another year to this program, fiscal year 29, and we're going to be re-upping and reanalyzing our next 5-year period as soon as we get what the 29 projects are going to be. So the next page, the next sheet that I have here is the authorized and unissued debt. These are all loan orders that the town council has authorized for these various projects, and they total $80 million. These are expected to be issued in the near future. Highlighted here is the first loan payment for Strawberry Hill Road. We expect to have to budget for in fiscal year 25, as well as all these other projects. And for the Centerville route, which we just appropriated the money for as part of the fiscal year 24 CIP, we don't expect that loan to hit the operating budget until 2026. What's interesting is that when we look at Strawberry Hill Road, that council order 2019-213 was the original appropriation that occurred in fiscal year 20. 5 years later, 2025 is when the loan hit our operating budget. So it's taken 5 years from the date of it was appropriated to the time we expect the loan payment from that project to hit our operating budget. 5 years. I don't think that's going to be the case going forward for all of our other projects. I think this project was unique. It was our first major project. It was done in conjunction with the Vineyard Wind installation. We have, the latest issue being the installation of risers that will go in certain areas, which will delay it a little bit more. And so I think this project is unique. I think going forward, we'll see a little bit more acceleration from the time the project costs are appropriated to the time the loan that we take out the fund, it hits our operating budget. Right. And so I've indicated that here on this spreadsheet, giving you all that information, what the amount of the loan is, what intended use plan. The project was listed on the Department of Environmental Protection's intended use plan, what year that occurred. So for example, Strawberry Hill Road was on the 2020 intended use plan. And if it's on the intended use plan, that means we can finance it through the State Revolving Loan Fund or the Mass Clean Water Trust. That's what the financing line is here. Mass Clean Water Trust is MCWT. And since it was listed on the IUP, it's eligible for the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund subsidy, and that was 25%. This project also was listed on the 2020 intended use plan for Route 28 Ino Road intersection. That received the 25. We expect the 25% subsidy from that as well. Route 28 East construction was also listed on the 2021 IUP. That was eligible for a Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund subsidy of about 22.6%. These next 4 projects were not listed on the IUP, making them ineligible for subsidies. And that's because they're either for design or study work. And the trust will not fund design or study work. So we have to do what's called general obligation bonds, or GOBs, fund those. And then this project, the one we just appropriated for constructing the Centerville route, was listed on DEP's 2023 IUP list. And so that is eligible for a 25% subsidy. We were just notified by the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund that they're going to provide 25% subsidies for all projects listed on the 2023 IUP. However, going forward, that level of subsidy is unsustainable with their revenue source. And we've been told to accept about a 12% subsidy going forward.
The subsidy you're referring to is the subsidy in interest costs, correct?
Subsidy on principal cost.
Principal.
Principal, yes. So we won't have
So
to pay, for example,
you borrow 30 million and you have to pay back 75% of that.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah. So, but going forward, they're going to be less. There is, you know, advocacy going on right now of all Cape communities, working with the legislative delegation and the lieutenant governor's office to try to get the state to add more money to the state's revolving loan fund to continue with a 25% subsidy for the next, so that we can continue with 25% subsidies for the next 3 years. And I think they ran some numbers and it resulted in the state having to commit something like $25 million for the next 3 years, and we'll be able to continue with 25% subsidies. But that takes state funding to do that. But the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund revenue source is not enough to sustain that level of subsidy. And the reason why is because project costs for all Cape communities that are being submitted are far higher than what was originally estimated when the trust was created and they started issuing 25% subsidies. Yarmouth, for example, just came in with a $200 million project that got submitted for the 2023 IUP list. And so there's just an expansion, there's this explosion of acceleration of projects as well as inflation.
Sure.
These projects have all gotten much more expensive over the past couple of years. So this, again, this schedule shows us what the annual loan payments are estimated to be, the interest rate that we expect to incur on that loan. If we fund it through the trust for a 20-year period, we can get a 1.5% loan. If we fund it through the trust for a 30-year period, the loan's going to be a little bit higher as far as the interest rate goes. We estimate that to be around 0.25%. If we fund it through a general obligation bond issue, we're estimating a higher interest rate. We're seeing our last general obligation bond resulted in about a 3.8% interest rate. So we expect these to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 4%. And these are what the annual payments look like, each one of these loans. And if I go back to the first page, that's what these numbers are here. They're authorized and unissued debt going out. The 2.7 million that you see here on an annual basis in the out years, it's the total of all these loan payments right here.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So that's our authorized and unissued debt. $80 million right now, authorized, unissued, soon to be issued, and will start impacting the operating budget in the future. We move into our 5-year CIP. 2024 was just approved. It's $33 million right here, so that's accounted for under authorized and unissued. We have $275 million here over the next 4-year period between 25, 26, 27, and 28 for all these projects. The numbers highlighted in green, we anticipate on funding with cash. The projects highlighted in blue, the numbers in blue here are projects we anticipate funding through loans. And we're assuming right now that every single one of these will get listed on DEP's intended use plan. No guarantee, but we're making the assumption that they will, qualifying us for financing through the Mass Clean Water Trust. And therefore, a 12% subsidy from the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. And we expect an additional 3% subsidy from the trust itself, so a total of 15%. That results, instead of having to borrow 100 or pay back 136 million, which gets authorized for borrowing, we only have to pay back 116 million because 15% of the principal will be forgiven. And since it's a 30-year loan, 2.25% interest rate is assumed. And that results in these loan payments down at the bottom, which I don't see. I don't think you can see those because of the ribbon, ribbon that's popping up here. But I go
There
back
we go.
to previous pages. Here's the estimated debt. And the 25 projects, $4.5 million a year. And the 26 projects, $1.5 million a year, and so forth. So what we're assuming here too is that it'll take 2 years from the time the money is appropriated to do the project to the time it hits the operating budget. And again, that's a little more accelerated than what we saw happen with the Strawberry Hill Road project. But that being our first project that involved Vineyard Wind as well, I think that took a little bit longer than what is going to happen in the future. Well, timing is also another major assumption that we have to make because I don't control the timing of when this stuff's all going to hit the operating budget. It really depends upon the construction occurring. So that's authorized and unissued. This is authorized, expected to be authorized in the future. Here we go. Now you can see the payments highlighted down below. There's the 4.5 million for the 25 projects, which will hit the budget starting in 2027. 1.5 million for the 26 projects, which will hit the budget starting in 2028, and so forth. And finally, these are my estimates for assessments and when assessments will start hitting the cash flow. So for all these first 4 projects, I have a 1 next to the project title, and what that represents is the dwelling units able to connect upon these lines going active. The number of dwelling units that you see here, for example, 238 dwelling units for Strawberry Hill Road, that's the number of estimated dwelling units that'll have the ability to tie into that line immediately once that line goes active. However, the cost of that project is going to be distributed out to over 4,000 properties. We don't know the exact number yet, but we estimate it's going to be over 4,000 properties because that is a main trunk line. And the way the sewer assessment laws work is that main trunk lines, which are general benefit facilities, have to be allocated out to an area that it'll serve. And that's an area beyond the property abutters, because there are a lot of other neighborhoods that'll ultimately feed into that main trunk line. And the portion of that cost is going to get assessed out to over 4,000 property owners, we estimate. Working on narrowing down what that number is. That's an engineering thing. We have to figure out exactly what properties we anticipate going through which trunk lines as we build these main trunk lines out. Therefore, assessments per parcel are estimated to be well below what the assessment cap of $10,000 is. We're estimating right now about $3,000 per property for an assessment on these first few projects because, again, it's main infrastructure, trunk lines, and they're going to serve a large population. So we have to allocate those costs out to that much larger population. The denominator becomes much larger. It's not until we get out into the Finney's Lane neighborhoods here that we start anticipating assessments potentially hitting the $10,000 cap. And we're going to have to reevaluate this on a continuous basis to narrow this down. But it's not until then do we anticipate the cap to be hit. And this also assumes, it's 5 years down the road, or year assessed 2028. It's 5 years down the road. So at that point in time, we're making an assumption here that the council may adjust the assessment cap to have some factor for inflation. Right. But I don't know. I can't be sure if and how much they will, but I have to make an assumption here that maybe we'll inflate at 3% a year, I think is what I use. And we'll assume that these assessments will all be paid back over a 30-year period, which is the maximum allowed by law, at 4.5%, which is percentage points higher than what we borrow to do the project, which is written into the sewer assessment ordinance. And that gives us what our annual assessment revenue is expected to be. So when all these projects are completed, the assessments have been issued, we maximize out here at 2.149 million in annual assessment revenue. Okay, and that goes back to my cash flow here, new sewer assessment revenues. You start to see that 2.149 million come on the books by 2032.
Mhm.
So that's where I'm at right now. I still need to do more work on analyzing new user charge revenue, but I do have a factor in here for that as well, because as we tie in more properties, but it's going to be a moving target. And I have to look at this on almost on a quarterly basis to try to get any updated information I can when it comes to subsidy levels, borrowing rates through the trust, borrowing rates through general obligation bonds, the number of assessments we actually issue, how many years people decide to amortize their assessments or whether they pay it off in full, and so forth. So we've built this model, we update it as almost on a quarterly basis to reflect any major change that occurs. Interest rate on sewer or on excess investments or cash deposits earned is another one. So right now, again, just these projects over the next 5 years that are listed in the 24 through 28 capital program, it looks as though using all these assumptions that we're okay. Well, we know more projects are coming. And so at some point, you look at these excess commitments over resources, you know, we're committing more on an annual basis than what we're taking in. But that starts to go down in the last 2 years here because we start getting the assessment revenue in. But more projects are going to come on, resulting in more loan payments. And we're going to end up these commitments or this excess commitments on an annual basis is going to start getting larger and larger and larger, which could potentially mean we need more general fund revenue to keep this program going. Or something else has to happen with meals and rooms taxes or subsidy levels or project costs perhaps go down. Maybe we have some deflation in the outer years. We've seen that before. When you hit a recession, typically, competition for projects get a little bit more competitive, and we may have companies, as communities start appropriating fewer and fewer dollars to do projects, and the competition starts to ramp up, and we get better pricing on our project bids.
Thank you.
A lot of moving parts.
I've got a question. Based on your projections of the resources, and we're looking pretty good, does that mean we would not need the debt exclusion?
Perhaps.
Yeah, because we're looking pretty good through 33.
Yep, I remember I said when we made the investment of additional $2 million from the general fund as part of the 24 budget, and that's annual $2 million. I projected out that we would bump that debt exclusion request out 2 years. Okay, 2 years would get us to 2027 CIP.
27.
Okay, and that when you look at what happens in that year, that's the year we start incurring debt service and project management costs in excess of our resources. Now, that would be unsustainable for an extended period of time if these assessment revenues weren't coming in. So if all of these other revenue assumptions are fairly accurate, then yes, I think the next 5 years we could possibly cover without an exclusion. But I need to do a little bit more work on this to make that conclusion, and that could change, Lillian, in a 6-month time period if something major happens. It's either a revenue source or a project cost. So I can't narrow down if and when we ever will need a debt exclusion, but for when I initially said 2027, the reason why I said that was because our commitments were exceeding our resources here. But when I flushed out assessment revenue and user charge revenue and started adding that back into the model, we're okay for the next 5 years.
Well,
But
we
more
know that,
projects are coming on.
yeah,
more
we know that,
projects will come on.
we know that costs aren't gonna go down, so.
Right. Now, we've got a projection for the new user revenue, which goes up substantially. Will there be a required time for residences to hook up?
That is a decision of the Board of Health. And I think what's being talked about right now is a 6-month requirement. But they have not passed that yet. And of course, there'll be exceptions to that. Obviously, there's going to be situations where not everybody's going to be able to hook up within a 6-month time period. Just for example, when we get out here to, let's go to the assessment page. Look what happens here in Phineas Lane neighborhood, 632 properties. 632 properties have to hook up within a 6-month period of time. Who's going to do the connections?
Exactly.
And there'll be other, not just for that reason, but there could be other extenuating circumstances where a property owner may apply for an extension from the Board of Health from that 6-month period requirement, if that's the requirement. But I think that's what they're going to end up voting on, is a 6-month hookup. At least that's been recommended to them, I believe, by others, that they should look at a 6-month requirement. But and I think that's going to be very challenging for our property owners to get done because of the number of contractors that are available and the timing of the year. And if this competition is going to be tough if there aren't enough contractors to hook up all these, thousands of properties as we build this out within a 6-month time period.
What interest rate are you using to estimate? What is your estimated inflation rate? You have
Inflation, I think I used 3% going forward. Typically, it's been 2 to 3% in a given year, but it's been much higher than that over the past year. But beyond that, I brought it back down to what we typically see, right? 2 to 3%.
Right.
Normal economic times. That's what the Feds kind of target. They kind of target the inflation.
Yeah, that's the target. Yeah.
So that's what I used.
Thank you.
So these project costs that you see here, these were original. I got numbers that you see in the CIP book are different from what you see here.
Right.
In fiscal year 25, 26, 27, and 28. The reason why is the numbers that were provided to us by Public Works did not include an inflationary factor. Those costs were costs stated in 2023 dollars. So I inflated them out. 3% a year.
You use the 3%.
Yes. So they're higher here. What you see here, they're going to be higher than what they submitted in their CIP book.
Yeah, the 308 total was more like 274.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it seems to me this is a very powerful model, and it's considered a lot of things. But I'm struck by how much of the coverage is coming from growth and basically Chapter 70. They look optimistic. Not that I'm a negative person, but if you go back to your the general fund contribution for new growth doubles over time. Do we really think that? I mean, I wasn't expecting that much new growth. Is that?
This line here?
Yeah.
Okay, so every year we've been averaging about 1.2 million dollars in new property tax growth a year.
Yep.
And so we've committed about $750,000 of that to this program. The rest remains in the general fund to fund other services. So it's 750 of new revenue every year. So 750 year one, 1.5 million.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so this is a cumulative number. It's not
Got it.
1.5 million of new money. It's 750 from the previous year plus another 750 from the new year.
Right.
Yeah,
And
and
then
so
two-
after 5 years, it's the 3.75 million because we're taking the first $750,000 of new property tax growth and dedicating it to this program. And we typically get over $1 million of new property tax growth a year.
Yeah,
And I don't expect that to go down below 750.
okay. And the additional general fund contribution is made possible by the increase in chapter 70.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep, so that's 2 million a year, every year. That repeats itself. Yep.
Yep.
Now here's the other thing, Neil. I'm glad you brought this up because what happens if we end up in a period of time where, we have a state aid cut like we did back in the last recession where they cut chapter 78, 20% across the board. That would be a $5 million hit to us. If they were to do something like that again, even a 10% cut would be a $2.5 million hit to us because our chapter 78 now is 25 million. Where do we make that up? In the general fund for that lost revenue source. And can we continue to sustain or put the $2 million here to this program, or do we need to redirect it back to our operating budget so that we can maintain services?
Yep. Yeah, that's what I was, I think this is a good model and it lets you do what ifs like that. If you get,
Yeah, those are all policy decisions that we'd have to make on an annual basis.
Yeah, the other thing that strikes me is I wonder what the impact will be of additional phases of investment after 2028.
Yeah.
Those just layer on here. And so this is kind of the best case analysis at this stage.
Yeah,
isn't
we're
it?
trying, we're trying to look at this in 5-year increments. Because we can't really plan with any kind of accuracy beyond 5 years.
Yeah, I understand.
What all this is. And so, yeah, we'll keep adding another year onto this as the next year comes and run the numbers out and see if we're still okay. But that's all we can do is just keep updating this with the newest information that we have. It's going to be very fluid. We need to be adaptive. And take everything into consideration on the financing side, and look at this on a quarterly basis. And I may be back before the town council either on a quarterly basis or a semi-annual basis to present something like this to them, so that they have a general sense as to how we doing with the projections and highlight significant changes that may have occurred. And this is the biggest significant change right now. $2 million of additional general fund investment buys us a lot of good with this program.
Yeah, it seems, that the idea that a debt exclusion would be needed in the next several years is totally dependent on, or is most dependent upon that continuing. And if it doesn't, that seems to be the only real risk. Am I wrong?
Subsidies. I just don't know. My big risk here for me is, will these projects all make DEP's IUP list? It's so competitive. And so we may lose a good portion of these subsidies right here, which will ultimately increase our annual loan payments.
Yeah, and I can't do it exactly, but the loan payments aren't going to go up. They'd go up, 12% maybe, right? So
yeah, cumulatively they add up. There's investment income could be another thing. If we
right.
We weren't getting anything in our investments a year ago, maybe 50 basis points. So
right, but certainly looking at, I think this is really good in terms of for 2025 and 2026, the excess resources are so large that even that there's almost nothing that is going to change those.
I
I
don't
think,
think,
I
yeah,
I think, I think the town council and the town manager should be very happy that things are not, there's not an immediate cliff coming up, that this looks very positive. As you say, long-term, you got to keep looking at how things change. But the good news is there's no cliff in the near future, which I think is good.
and then, the other big question mark here is with these proposed regulations being issued that go into effect on July 7th, I think, Hector, you mailed out the drafts of those revised regulations. We are analyzing those internally. Multiple department heads are looking at those to see how they may impact us. And, that, if you look at those regs, I think they talk about a 75% reduction in the nitrogen load within a 20-year period. How will that implement or impact our implementation schedule? Are we going to have to accelerate more projects in order to meet that?
Right.
So that's another big question mark that could have a significant impact on this cash flow. So we're analyzing that. I'm not prepared to provide you any intelligent response as to what those regs mean for as far as an impact to us, because it's going to take some analysis from multiple department heads, and we'll be, advising the town council in the near future on what that means, and I'll update this committee as well.
Oh, next meeting, perhaps?
Perhaps. For who? Next council meeting or next?
No, next meeting for CFAC.
Perhaps next meeting.
No, we're scheduled for July 24th.
Okay,
We're going to go through the first draft of our annual review. So we'll have time, if Mark has met with his brain trust and figured it all out by then. Thank you for this. Can you send this to us?
Yes, I can.
Thank you.
Just a point of information, July 24th, I will be away.
Oh,
So I'll have to probably ask Gareth Markwell if he's available to run the meeting. So we may not have an update on the regulations for you with that meeting.
okay. Thank you. Does anybody
Fine,
have
Mark.
any
Mark,
comments?
whenever you're ready,
about this?
there's no particular rush here.
Okay.
Does anybody have any comments or questions about this?
No, I would just comment that I agree with Neil that, in the next several years, the outlook is certainly more positive than it's been prior. But there are a lot of moving parts here, as Mark has spelled out, changes in subsidies, changes in Chapter 70, a lot of things that could impact this in a negative way. But for now, things look good to me.
Yeah, the projections are very positive. I noticed that Gordon is on our meeting. Do you have any comments, Councilor Starr?
Wait a second, I'll even show my face. Good
Well,
evening.
here you are.
Yes. My issue is the short SRF loans that we're going to pay 2.5% interest on. And there is a way that we could policy-wise get them down to 0%. I don't know if Marcus talked about that at all, but it has to do with land use controls. We basically have to be what's called flow neutral, which would in some people's minds would put a brake on growth, but it would also control, because if we lose Title V controls, I'm not, we're not really sure what's going to happen. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we meet, as Councilor Starr mentioned, we do meet 4 out of the 5 criteria to qualify for 0% loans through the trust. And that 5th criteria is what's called a neutral flow land use policy, or flow neutral land use policy. And we have not adopted one. And not being a land use expert, I think we do have our director of planning and development as well as public works discussing the development of such a policy and what it could potentially mean to our community. Because yeah, there are questions like Councilor Starr brought up. I mean, what does it mean in terms of the ability to develop vacant land or redevelop existing land that is already improved? Will we not be able to do any expansion on property, like for example, build housing? Well, I mean, it conflicts with increasing the philosophy that we need increased housing in town, potentially, right? Because if we have this flow neutral land use policy, yet we're trying to increase more housing, but that would disqualify us for 0% loans because we're putting more sewage into our system as a result of this expansion of housing. They conflict with one another, I guess. You know, the housing policy and a flow neutral policy conflict with one another. So that needs to be ironed out.
It does, because when the CWMP was created, they looked at places like Twin Brooks and said, what is the highest potential that could be built here? They didn't figure Twin Brooks on single family homes. So there is some capacity built in for expansion. And if we could maybe do some land use controls with like village centers, maybe along like Bell Tower Mall, you know, maybe within a quarter-mile walking distance of that, gives more capacity there. And so we're sort of controlling in the long run where people can build high density. So those discussions are going on, you know, with Elizabeth Jenkins. So that's nothing we can hash out here, but I just wanted to make you aware of it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, it's a good point, and thank you for that. And it's still important, though, to recognize that we have to get our project listed on DEP's intended use plan in order to qualify for that 0% loan. And it's such a competitive process. They had over $2 billion of applications last year. I think they awarded about 800 million in clean water projects out of 2 billion in submissions. So there's no guarantee that, you know, even if we got a land use policy in place and qualify for 0%, that we'll get that 0% loan, because we may not make the cut. But I'm pretty confident that many of our projects would make it because they'll score well. It's just a matter of available funding that the trust will have.
Okay.
They're going to run out of money. So it's just because it's not just Barnstable that is submitting all of these projects, but all the other Cape Towns, as well as communities across the state, especially the MWRA, submitting very large projects every year.
So we're hoping at the next town council meeting to at least put together a letter to, you know, to say we need more money in the trust fund, you know, and as a town.
And the source of those funds, Gordner Mark, is federal dollars?
So the state trusts are capitalized with federal money. Every state in the country has these revolving loan funds, and they all receive capitalization grants from the EPA. And then the state matches those capitalization grants with some money, not much. And so that helps the trusts award projects, these capitalization grants, as well as the loan payments that they're receiving from previously issued loans that they're collecting. They're recycling that. So their pool's getting a little bigger every year if they receive additional capitalization grants from the EPA. But projects are getting bigger. More projects are being submitted, and the cost of the projects are growing. And I'm not sure that capitalization grants are keeping up with that growth.
That's true. Yeah. Anybody
And
else?
that, by the way, is how the county's Aqua Fund was created. You're probably familiar with, they have a septic loan program at the Barnstable County. And it's called their Aqua Fund now. And people will be eligible to get a loan through that program to do their sewer connection. It does qualify for a loan through that program. That program was created with a capitalization grant from the Mass Clean Water Trust that the county received. So I don't remember exactly how much money they got to begin with. It may have been 10 million, 5 or 10 million. and they issued loans, and as people pay those loans back, they recycle those loans into new loans.
So my question, Mark, is so those loans don't cover the sewer assessment.
No, no.
Okay, yeah, so that's something the town will give up to 30 years to pay that back?
Yes, we'll offer them up to 30 years to pay the sewer assessment back. We're also gonna have a program that works like the Aqua Fund, where they can have the town finance their sewer connection cost and amortize it for up to 30 years. But the interest rate's not gonna be as good as what the county can offer under the Aqua Fund for 20 years. So the Aqua Fund's probably gonna be a better program for most people when it comes to the sewer connection. But in the event they can't get the loan through the county's Aqua Fund, they can come to the town and we can finance their sewer connection for them and add to their tax bills. And that'll be a separate betterment added to their tax bill in addition to their sewer assessment.
They're gonna be a lot of work for some people,
A lot of work, yes.
getting 3 or 4, bids just for the hookup, and then figuring out where the money's coming from, but DPW is trying to give people support, so.
Yeah.
And they've actually used this committee's, frequently asked questions. So that they've worked on that and expanded it, what you guys did last year.
DPW has expanded that list?
Yeah, they have a new communications person named Kelly Colopy, who has been working on a handbook.
Right.
People who are, so that they, I think it's like 70 pages online, but it includes a lot of frequently asked questions.
Yeah, there's been some major updates that Kelly's done to our Barnstable Water Resources website. Take a look at that when you get a chance. She's really done a terrific job in providing more information about this program.
Yeah, the handbook is supposed to come out anytime now, right? Very shortly. It's not out yet?
I don't know. I don't know if it's online in parts or we'll all go back and look for it.
Yeah, I looked for it the other day and it said it's coming on shortly.
Okay.
So it should be there. Well, that's good news. And then we will provide that link in our annual review. Because I think residents would find it very, very helpful.
Sure. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
she could come in and run through it quickly for you too.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe
That's a good idea. Maybe we could put that on a future
Invite
agenda.
her. Yeah.
we're going to include that in our annual review because I think that's a very valuable new link for residents. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, any other questions for Mark? He's going to put this presentation, he's going to send it to us. Is there any other business that you'd like to bring up today? Our next meeting is July 24th, and we will be reviewing our annual review. And so if you could get it to me the week before so I can put it all together, and then I'll send it to Wendy, who is our scribe.
Oh, I'm the scribe.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You're a better scribe than I am. I would be a disaster.
Well, I guess I got to use the computer that actually has Word on it.
So deadline for
figure this
getting it.
out.
So deadline July 23rd, Friday of the previous week. What?
No,
Give
if
us
you
a
could
hard.
get- if you
Give
could
us.
get it- If you could get it to me the previous week, because
Well,
I have to consolidate the whole thing.
right. So give us a date. That's all I'm asking.
Okay. Anytime the week before. So if
Okay,
you
so
could
the
get,
week of the
if-
17th.
right, if you could get it to me no later than the 19th,
Okay.
really appreciate it.
Okay. I'm making note of that. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any other business to come before the committee? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I move.
Second,
Second.
it's been moved and seconded to adjourn. Is Chuck still here?
I'm here.
Would you
He's
take
there.
the roll, please?
Sure. Lillian,
Yes,
Neil.
Here. Yes.
Hector,
Yes.
Chris,
Yes.
Wendy,
Here. Yes.
Jackie,
Yes.
and Chuck is yes, so we can adjourn.